Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're jumping back into Venom to where it's like from here we start to jump into the deep end with a lot of stuff. And this issue is really just the start of where it's going. But with everything that we've seen so far with the time travel and the introduction of Meridius, this issue actually low-key slips in a little retcon that throws Meridius into like your mid-90s Spider-Man comics. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so when we jump back in with the Venom symbiote, who at this point had been left behind by Dylan as a result of Dylan having his trust issues with him. But also, like we had seen, Dylan's poor judge of character had only caused him and Sleeper to walk right into a trap to where Archer just handed over the two of them to Liz Allen. But at this point, when we jump back to the Venom symbiote, we find him following a trail of chemicals that he recognizes to be Sleeper's. And with him picking up this trail, the first thing he's thinking is that Sleeper and Dylan are in trouble. But then it's here again where we see the Venom symbiote struggle with the idea of following Dylan like some hurt puppy, because Dylan made his choice by telling the Venom symbiote not to come with them. But even with this being the case, the Venom symbiote can't help but to go after Dylan, because for the Venom symbiote there's a lot of Eddie that is still part of this symbiote, which really at this point is also part of the dilemma, because with things being rocky between the two of them, the symbiote still wants to figure out a way to show Dylan those pieces of Eddie that are still in there. But with him following this trail of Sleeper's fumes, he quickly realizes that he's been set up, because right away he's attacked by Mr. Carson from the Life Foundation, who had been recently given a new suit with a number of upgrades by Carlton Drake. And at this point, we don't really know how he pulled off the whole Sleeper trick as far as luring out the Venom symbiote, but even still there's room for a logical explanation. Because even when Carson shows up here, the Venom symbiote recognizes him from him and Dylan's last run-in with the Life Foundation, and really more so Carson's scent than anything. But also back at that time, Sleeper got in on the action too, so reproducing his scent may have came from this, or even from a number of other situations, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, with Alchemax having Sleeper at the moment, and this of course being the Life Foundation, because though they are separate entities, on the higher end you do have certain factors that are playing both sides, but we'll revisit that whole thing in a little bit. But in this moment here with Mr. Carson coming after the Venom symbiote, you also have this moment to where they're kind of sizing each other up, with this more or less being like their rematch since issue 2, because you got Venom on one hand who's like, I can smell you sweating under your suit, like I know you're nervous, but then Mr. Carson, he lets the Venom symbiote know that things are going to be different this time because he's better equipped, and the Spearhead has got a point to make. And with the way that he says it, it almost sounds like Spearhead is like a name that he's going to stick with, like that might be a thing at some point, might not, but nonetheless with him attacking the Venom symbiote, he's figuratively taking that role, because Carlton Drake wants Mr. Carson to literally be that poking prod going after the Venom symbiote to provoke its next stage of evolution. And for Mr. Carson, he's really just being used as a tool in the big picture. Because for him, like aside from just getting a check, he also has a bit of a chip on his shoulder because of how badly him and his men lost to the Venom symbiote and the Sleeper, which for the time being is Mr. Carson's motivation to go after the Venom symbiote and really hold nothing back. But also for him, he doesn't understand what Carlton Drake sees in the Venom symbiote, but he goes after him anyway because it's his job. But then with some of the things that he says while he's doing this, like you can tell it's also a bit personal, because with him pointing out like, yeah, he may have taken an L last time, but at least in his case, he knows his weaknesses, or better yet his limitations, and he knows that in his case the suit and the spear is doing all the work. But even still, he calls out the Venom symbiote by telling him he doesn't know who he is without Eddie Brock. And with saying this, not only is Mr. Carson taking the personal jab, but it's also him telling the Venom symbiote that I am besting you in this moment because I know who I am and I've adapted accordingly by getting this expensive suit for free, finding you, and then giving you the business. But also what we come to find out about this suit, and really more so specifically the spear itself, is that this spear that Mr. Carson's been given, it's been designed to act as a tuning fork for the Venom symbiote. And so with hearing this, originally like a tuning fork would be used to tune an instrument to make sure that it achieves perfect pitch. And just starting with that, like this method begs the question, beyond what we know as far as Carlton Drake wanting to force the evolution of the Venom symbiote. And that question is much like a tuning fork, is the Venom symbiote being tuned or forced into a specific direction of evolution to become something very specific? And though we don't have the answer to that at this point, we do know that Carlton Drake doesn't either, because he's expressed he's eager to see where this is gonna go. And aside from that, in the grand scope, the Life Foundation isn't the only factor that's pushing Venom to peak evolution. But I especially like this whole idea of the tuning fork, especially if you think of it as an analogy for We Are Venom, because tuning forks create their pitch by using two ends that are equal in mass that push vibrations to each other. And I think that's something that both Eddie and the Venom symbiote are going to have to figure out at some point, because if they become a type of tuning fork, there will really be no limit to what they can do. And this could go for Eddie in the symbiote or Dylan in the symbiote. Because real tuning forks go beyond music, they go deep into science, they measure light, which from there now open a number of possibilities now that time travel's a thing, with what we'd seen with Eddie up to this point. But enough of the We Are Venom tuning fork talk, because it's at this point where Carlton Drake reaches out to Mr. Carson, and Drake tells him to stand down after knocking the Venom symbiote on top of some truck, because at this point Drake believes that there's been enough poking and prodding, at least for the time being. But then from here, jumping over to Alchemax, like at this point where we jump over to Dylan, it's pretty interesting what we end up finding here, because at this point where the different scientists are reporting their results to Liz Allen, as far as them studying Dylan's codex interaction with a range of different Clintar biomaterial which they've had in their possession since Extreme Carnage. But every time they attempt to bond these samples to Dylan, every last one of these samples keeps getting broken down, which is really interesting because it's very reminiscent of what we'd seen with Dylan's previous effects on Carnage and Sleeper, which if I remember correctly, that was something that happened on Liz Allen's roof. So if she was cleaning the chimney that day, she would have known all this already. But nonetheless, these results are very reminiscent of back when Dylan had his powers. And also with the scientists here claiming that Dylan has been pushed to his limit, it also raises a bit of the curiosity of Dylan making changes as well. But also with hearing these results, Liz tells the scientists or the doctors to keep an eye on his vitals, but by all means continue his testing, because she still believes that they're going to come across some crazy discovery. But at the same time, when she goes into her office and shuts the door, and she asks herself like, what have I got myself into? And it's almost like in this moment, just because of fear, like she's having doubts about the whole thing. But also during this time while Liz has stepped away, moments later in the lab, Eddie Brock shows up, but in a time-jumping quantum leap kind of way, where he's not actually here, but he's able to create a construct of himself by using the other Clintar samples and symbiotes in the lab with Dylan. And so now one thing, like this version of Eddie, who's definitely from the future, like he's seen some things play out that we haven't seen in the series just yet. Like he's much further along than the Eddie we'd seen at the end of issue 1. But even still with Eddie, at this point for him, he still hasn't completely figured out the whole time traveling thing, and it's for that reason that he lets Dylan know that he won't be able to sustain this form for long. And because of that, he just tries to go rapid fire. Because with what he's learned or seen at this point, since he's last talked to Dylan, things have changed. Because he tells Dylan that Archer and the symbiote are the only people that Dylan can trust. But even with him saying this, it's still like we know that Eddie doesn't really have like the whole picture. Like there's some events that he's just not filled in on. Because when he says this, Dylan just goes off because for one, Archer turned on him. And then two, Dylan tells him like him bonding with the symbiote is what got him in here in the first place. Because to Dylan, everything went left from then till now. But even aside from that, Dylan isn't really even sure if this is his dad. And not just off of the current presentation, but also with him seeing his dad at home and then having another version of his dad call him at the same time, and it's pretty much got Dylan like, dang Eddie, how you an omnipresent absentee father? But nonetheless, with Eddie running out of time, he frees Dylan from his constraints, and before he leaves, he tells Dylan the one thing that he does know, the one thing that he's sure about, and he tells Dylan that the Venom symbiote is coming for him, which then of course has Dylan like, well, how do you know? Because Dylan and the Venom symbiote exchanged some choice words last time. But even with that being the case, Eddie lets Dylan know that there's a part of him in that symbiote that will never leave Dylan's side. And just before he leaves, he tells Dylan because we are Venom. But then after this, when Eddie leaves with Dylan free, he then runs and goes to get Sleeper to more or less try to break him out of his containment. But then also while this is happening, the whole narration of what Dylan is doing, it's being given by Meridius, because he knows what's happening step by step, starting from Dylan going after Sleeper to where then Dylan's cornered by Liz and the rest of the security, all the way through to the Venom symbiote making its way to Alchemax and bonding with Dylan. But also with Meridius narrating this part, he expresses that it's here to where the actions that they've taken to act as a catalyst, like this is the moment where they begin to bear fruit. And with the way that Meridius expresses it, he says it starts on the night that Eddie died when Dylan first bonded with the Venom symbiote, and I don't think that it really means like the actual first time that Dylan had bonded with the Venom symbiote, because like we had seen before, that was in King in Black. But instead, with how it's worded, it's really more so like he's pointing out that the first time that they bonded after Eddie's death, it was actually from that moment going forward when a transformation had been set in motion. But then it's here where we go over to Meridius, who's telling all of this to Carlton Drake. And really it's here where we get the confirmation that Meridius, he's pulling the strings. And on top of this is also here where Meridius gives us a bit of a deep cut explainer. Because when Meridius tells Carlton Drake that he was once a man whose ambitions left him a mangled creature, less than human, until Meridius restored him into what he is, and I can't help but think that this is a callback to Spider-Man the Arachnist Project from back in the mid-90s, when Peter's professor Toshiro Makashi created the Arachnist Project with the intention of curing cancer, but then when Carlton Drake used it on himself, he then became this big crazy arachnid looking thing, which at the time really looked more like a brood, but hey. But back then when Drake had taken this for himself to cure his cancer and evolve into a higher life form, he had been believed to have been dead, with him being buried after an explosion while in a bunker below the Life Foundation. But towards the end of that series, in a very post-credit kind of manner, or mid-credit scene kind of manner, he climbed his way out from the wreckage looking way younger and with no crazy arachnid powers, mutations, or even the cancer that he was initially dying of. And back at the time, it was really just a thing of like, well, somehow this happened. There was no explanation. At least until now, because Meridius was like, yep, that was me. But not only do we get like the reveal slash retcon that was Meridius, who quote unquote denied Mistress death and restored Carlton Drake, but also it retroactively plugs that story into this one, with showing us another point in time where Meridius got involved, which is a crazy twist. But then on top of this, before Meridius leaves, he then calls in Bedlam, giving him the instructions to scare the boy a little bit. And just from the looks of this guy, I can't imagine that he does anything just a little bit, but pretty soon, we'll see. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so we can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and also what you guys think about the whole tuning fork thing, because it could be Dylan in the Venom symbiote, it could be Eddie in the Venom symbiote, or it could be an arrangement of all three, with the whole harmony of two of them pointing to one. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.